Please be seated for the prayer. May we, the councillors of Ku-ring-gai, always be aware that decisions we make affect the daily lives of those we represent. May we make these decisions with knowledge and goodwill, respecting the views of others, and may we show ourselves worthy to follow in the footsteps of those who have protected the special qualities of Ku-ring-gai for over 100 years. Amen. On behalf of Council, I recognise the traditional custodians of the land, the Ku-ring-gai people on whose land we meet. I would like to outline a few points regarding this evening's proceedings. Tonight's meeting will be live streamed on the Council website at www.kmc.nsw.gov.au/livestream. Only councillors and council staff will be shown on camera. The webcast of the meeting will remain on the website until the minutes of the meeting are formally adopted by Council. The webcast commences once the Mayor is seated and will cease if Council goes into a confidential session where the public and the press are excluded, pursuant to Section 10A of the Local Government Act. Council meetings remain open to the public as observers, but in line with the Code of Meeting Practice, speakers will now address the Council through the monthly public forums and not at Council meetings. For more information about addressing Council, please visit our website at www.kmc.nsw.gov.au. All present tonight must refrain from engaging in disorderly conduct, publicly alleging breaches of the Council's Code of Conduct, or making other potentially defamatory statements. There is to be no filming or photographs taken by members of the public during the Council meeting. Councillors and Council staff must declare and manage any conflicts of interest they may have in relation to any item of business that is the subject of the meeting agenda this evening. And for those members of the public who are here with signage and other material, I take that as an act of disorder, and those people will be removed if signs and placards are waved in this meeting. Councillors, are there any apologies? None. General Manager, are there any staff apologies?
There are none from the staff, Madam Mayor.
Councillors, are there any declarations of interest on items on the agenda? None. General Manager, are there any staff declarations?
There are none, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. General Manager, would you please comment on list the documents circulated to councillors?
There are two sets of greens, councillors. The lime greens contain two late reports, GB 15 2020 Women in Leadership Workshop and GB 16 Preliminary Heritage Assessment. And the lighter greens contain 4 items of councillor information in relation to GB 9, 3 items, GB 9, GB 10 and GB 11, all memorandums.
Thank you. General Manager, would you please list the reports to be considered in closed meeting tonight?
Madam Mayor and councillors, there is one report, which is C1 Open Space Acquisition Planning. The report together with attachment A1, and there are attachments for 4 other items as follows. GB 10, Linfield Village Green Rock Anchor Licence Deeds, attachment A1. GB 12, request for tender number 17 2019, fit out and lease of Old Headmaster's Cottage, 175 Rosedale Road, St Ives, attachment A1. GB 13, RFT 18 2019, Patari Reserve Playground Upgrade, attachments A1 and A2. And GB 14, RFT 19 2019, Roseville Park Tennis Pavilion, A1 and A2.
Thank you, councillors. I seek a motion that those items remain confidential. Moved Councillor Greenfield, seconded Councillor Smith. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Councillors, I seek a motion for confirmation of the minutes of the ordinary meeting of Council held on the 19th of November 2019. Moved Councillor Clark, seconded Councillor Chateau. All those in favour? That is unanimous. There are no mayoral minutes this evening. We move to petitions. Is there someone to move that? Councillor Spencer.
Yes. Thank you. This is a petition for... Sorry, just missed that page. A petition for a footpath at the cross junction of Grosvenor Street and Curtin Avenue, North Wahroonga. There are 106 signatories. And I move that to be... Petition be accepted. Thank you.
That they be
referred to the appropriate officer.
Received and referred to the appropriate officer for attention. That's moved by Councillor Spencer, seconded by Councillor Pettit. All those in favour? That is unanimous. We move to the minutes of the Traffic Committee, 21st of November 2019. Is there a mover, please? Councillor Spencer. You're moving that Council receive and note those minutes. Seconded by Councillor Kelly. All those in favour? That is unanimous. We move to general business, and I invite councillors to nominate any items on the agenda that they wish to have a site inspection. None. I invite councillors to nominate any item on the agenda that you wish to adopt in accordance with the officer's recommendation, allowing for minor changes without debate. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. All right, let's start with GB1, the Code of Conduct Complaint Statistics, the officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Kelly. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
Thank you. GB2, Council Sponsorship Program.
Withdraw.
Okay. GB3, Delegations for Council Recess.
Sorry, you're moving GB2 as...
As withdrawn.
Oh, sorry, I didn't
Yes.
hear that. Sorry, Councillor Nye. Thank you. Withdrawn by Councillor Nye.
GB3, Delegations for Council Recess, December through January 2019-2020, the officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Greenfield. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
Thank you. GB4, the OLG discussion paper, a new risk management and internal audit framework, the officer's recommendation.
Seconded Councillor Greenfield. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
Thank you. GB5, 3 Wonga Wonga Street, Taramara, the officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Smith. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
Thank you. GB6, Development and Regulation Policy Reviews and Updates, the officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Chateau. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
Thank you. GB7, Blue Gum High Forest Management within Ku-ring-gai, the officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Chateau. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB8, Draft Ku-ring-gai Playground Strategy, the officer's recommendation.
Seconded Councillor Greenfield. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB9, Finalisation of Community Participation Plan, the officer's recommendation.
And as amended in
Yes,
the
and with the amended
memo
Yes,
of today's
this is
vote.
true.
That is seconded by Councillor Chateau. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
Thank you. GB10, Linfield Village Green Rock Anchor Licence Deeds, the officer's recommendation, including the memorandum.
Seconded by Councillor Kelly. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
I've got a feeling I won't be able to do GB11, so I might move beyond that one. We'll go to GB12, which is the request for tender number 17, 2019. Fit out and lease of Old Headmaster's Cottage, 175 Rosedale Road, St Ives, the officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Greenfield. All those in favour? Yes, thank you. That's unanimous.
GB13, tender RFT 18 2019 Batari Reserve Playground Upgrade. The officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Smith. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
GB 14 tender RFT 19 2019 Roseville Park Tennis Pavilion. The officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Kelly. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
All right, GB 15 Women 2020 Women in Leadership Workshop. The officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Greenfield. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
And GB 16 Preliminary Heritage Assessment. The officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Chatto. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
And in terms of confidentials, we've got C1, the open space acquisition planning, the officer's recommendation.
Seconded by Councillor Kelly. All those in favour? That is unanimous.
And I believe that to be all the items that I could realistically pass. So back to you, Madam Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that takes us to GB2, Council Sponsorship. Sorry, Councillor Pettit.
I'd like to move NM1 as printed.
Is there a seconder for NM1? Councillor Spencer. So you're moving this now without debate. Sorry, who was the seconder? Councillor Spencer. All right. All those in favour? That is Councillors Nye, Pettit, Spencer, Greenfield, Chatto, Smith, Kelly. Against, Councillors Clark, Kay and Anderson. That is carried. We move now to GB2, Council Sponsorship Program, Ku-ring-gai Philharmonic Orchestra. Is there a motion, please?
Yeah, okay, I'll give it a go. I'd like to
Councillor
move
Nye.
something. I'd like to move that, and I don't have this typed up, so I'm just going to read it. That council provides $25,000 to the Ku-ring-gai Philharmonic Orchestra for the 2019-2020 sponsorship program. It will be left at council staff's discretion as to how to meet the 9,631 shortfall in the budget.
Seconded by Councillor Chatto. Councillor Nye, you can speak to that, but perhaps we better get it up on the screen first.
Okay, sure. So that council provide $25,000 to the Ku-ring-gai Philharmonic Orchestra for the 2019 to 2020 sponsorship program. It will be left at council staff's discretion as to how to meet the $9,631 shortfall in the budget. Allergy, hay fever, bushfire.
Never mind.
Yeah, I wish I brought a tissue.
Is that to your satisfaction?
Yeah, sure.
Councillor Nye, you may speak to that now.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will keep this short. I believe that a roughly $10,000 shortfall isn't a lot in the scheme of things for Ku-ring-gai Council. I know that we do spend money on other things, and while money is tight, I think an extra $10,000 for the arts is something that our community really needs. I note that in terms of arts funding across the state of New South Wales, a lot of the federal and the state government grants towards the arts, most of it goes towards the city CBD and the inner west. Not much of it goes towards the northern Sydney area. In fact, I don't know if this is correct, but I was told at Nesrock once that we got less than 0.01% of funding for the arts in the northern Sydney area, so I'm not sure if that's correct. So for something like this, a vital part of our arts here in Ku-ring-gai, I do believe that Ku-ring-gai can stretch to add an extra $10,000 from somewhere. We can adjust our budget somewhere else to meet that $10,000 need. I initially did have some other ideas of how that shortfall could be met, but I'm not going to push for that right now because I believe that council staff should be given a first chance to decide how to allocate the budget before councillors step in with wild ideas. And yeah, that's what I've got to say. I think we've supported KPO a lot in the past, and I'd like to see them well supported in the future for the arts of Ku-ring-gai. Thank you.
Councillor Shadow has seconded. You wish to speak to that?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I'm very pleased that Councillor and I have seen fit to do this. I think it was an inadvertent mistake that the Ku-ring-gai Philharmonic Orchestra didn't apply in the proper way and things got lost. And it seems, even though we only have allocated 15,369 that's available, I really think, like Councillor and I, that we could stretch. I think the arts are very important, and I think Ku-ring-gai Philharmonic Orchestra do an amazing job, fantastic job, and they support us, and they're a very good PR for Ku-ring-gai Council. Unfortunately, because we don't have the facilities, they have to perform at the concourse. I know this is an expensive venue, but they are very good at getting substantial donations as well. But I think we've always supported them, and I see no reason to not support them fully now.
Councillor Clark, you're next. Councillor Knight, do you still have your light on? Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question through you to the relevant officer. So council spent its budget of $79,500 minus the $15,000 for our sponsorships this year. Of that, given that we didn't sponsor the Philharmonic in that period, did we give those funds to other charitable or other organisations that received this sponsorship funding during that period that otherwise might not have if the Philharmonic had given their money on, that put an application in on time?
Director Bevan.
Madam Mayor and councillors, we were aware that the Philharmonic hadn't put the application in, and we didn't ring them to remind them. You may remember when the report went to council some months ago, we had a section within the report to say that we were holding some funds back because the Philharmonic hadn't put their application in, but we understood one was forthcoming.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question again for you, to the relevant officer, imagine Director Bevan again. Why did we only hold back $15,369 and not the $25,000 that they are requesting now?
Director Bevan.
Madam Mayor and councillors, the applications, generally we get a lot more applications for a lot more money than we have to distribute. So we went through them all and we allocated to the ones that we thought would be worthy. And in the meantime, some other ones have come in which were under the delegation, so they'll provide as well.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Another question through you to the relevant officer. So in the past, have we always funded the Ku-ring-gai Philharmonic Orchestra with the full amount they have requested year in, year out, or would this be an exception?
Director Bevan.
Madam Mayor and councillors, now you're testing my memory. I know last year we did provide a substantial amount because it was a significant year for the Philharmonic. There may be years in the past where we haven't given them the full amount, but I don't think we've ever given them anything like 10,000 less. It may have been 2 or 3, perhaps 5,000 less than they asked for.
Thank you, and thank you for answering those questions. Look, I'm going to be speaking against this motion. Look, the reality is the Ku-ring-gai Philharmonic Orchestra missed out on the deadline. We have spent so far sponsorship of $79,500. It's all well and good to say, oh, we can just find another $10,000 lying under the mattress. That money actually has to come from somewhere. We've spent a large amount of money sponsoring numerous charitable organisations across our area. We don't actually have a history, as has been explained, of always providing the full amount that has been requested. To now be making an exception, saying that, well, because they did it late, we're now going to be providing them with the full amount they're requesting, seems a bit weird to me. It seems to be we're rewarding an organisation for not doing things on time. If they had done it in time, perhaps we wouldn't have given them the full money. Here, to be quite frank, they should be happy they're getting anything that they didn't make on time. I think Philharmonic, incredibly useful and great organisation, and I think it's important to sponsor arts within our area. But we shouldn't be rewarding behaviour where they're funding late and the money is not coming in, the request did not come in on time. We've historically not given them the full sponsorship. We've historically not given multiple organisations the full sponsorship they have requested. And it's very easy to say then, well, why don't we just give, whatever X Marriott Street Theatre for young children the full amount they request, or any other charitable organisation for that matter. We have a set budget and we allocate to what we have. It's easy to just keep creeping up, $5,000 here, $10,000 here, but unfortunately we have a budget, we have to stick to it, and I think that $15,369 is a perfectly reasonable amount, and the Philharmonic should be quite frankly grateful that they're receiving this, given that they didn't make the budgetary period. I don't see why, again, I'm repeating points a little bit, but I don't think that we should be giving them this funding, the additional funding that they otherwise might not have gotten. If we were going back to the original sponsorship period, would they have got the full $25,000? Probably not. I think it'd be very unlikely they wouldn't. And therefore, so now we're saying that we're going to give them more. I don't think it stacks up. It's a nice gesture. I understand where Councillor Nye and Councillor So are coming from. It sounds very nice saying, oh, well, let's give them the full amount of money. But it doesn't actually consider our full sponsorship program and the effort and work that we do every single year to sponsor organisations across the local government area. And for that reason, I think that we should be providing them the original sum of money. And I'll actually be moving an alternate motion, which is the officer's recommendation, and I seek a seconder.
Seconder for that amendment? I'll second the amendment for you. And there being an amendment on the table now, under the new meeting practice, we can only debate the amendment. Councillor Clark, do you wish to speak to that amendment now?
No, I'm not going to repeat myself.
Sorry.
Councillor...
Could we just have a couple of minutes to have the amendment up there?
Yes, certainly, Councillor Spencer. We'll just get that on the screen, which is the officer's recommendation as printed in the business papers. Councillor Pettit, do you wish to speak to the amendment now?
Just a couple of questions.
Thank
you, Madam Mayor. Just a couple of questions in regards to the amendment. With the $79,500 sponsorship program, what percentage is that of the overall council expenditure for the year to the appropriate officer?
Director Marshall.
The total.
It's easy.
I'll let him do it. He's good.
Let me do it for you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm just calculating it unless the General Manager can do it in his head.
5 to negative times. Yeah, 0.05%. Yeah, pretty much.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor Clark is correct. It's 0.05%.
Okay, just for the gallery, 0.05%. So with the extra 9,600 to bring it up to the 25,000, above the 15,000 we have left over, what percentage would that be of that total council expenditure?
Director Marshall.
Madam Mayor, 0.01 or 2%.
Okay, just again for the gallery, 0.01% of the total council expenditure. Finally, just one last question in regards to running over budget, which is what we're potentially doing here. Does this happen across the board in the various areas, or is it just a one-off for council?
Director Marshall.
Madam Mayor, it is the case that there are budget variations and we report those to council quarterly. This is slightly different in that it was a formal program where applications are requested with a particular funding amount.
That's fair enough. So we do actually run over budget occasionally. One last question. This is just cast my mind back to councillors. When we did the Monopoly game sponsorship, was that funded or unfunded? Through you, Madam Mayor.
I'll refer that to Director Marshall. Or Director Bevan.
Madam Mayor and councillors, I cannot be entirely sure, but I'm pretty sure that came from the sponsorship program. So it would have been part of that sponsorship money.
Okay, much appreciated. I will be speaking against the amendment. I do not see a huge problem with allocating the extra funds. I can appreciate where Councillor Clark's going from, saying we have budgets and we should stick to them. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. It's not necessarily black and white. We're talking about the arts. We're talking about an organisation that's been with us many, many years that we have supported. And I would recommend, if you haven't been to hear the KPO, to all concerned, particularly those in the gallery, to borrow somebody else's phrase, do yourself a favour and get along. See where council's money goes to. It is well spent in sponsorship. I do not believe, from my perspective, being a Christmas Grinch, and it's only just me, I think we should be going with the 25,000, so I cannot support the amendment.
Councillor Shadow.
Yes, just a quick question, Madam Mayor, through you to Director Marshall. I'm going to ask the question that Councillor and I didn't ask, which is where would you be likely to find the extra, whatever it is, 9,000 something? Is that for a general revenue? Is that available? Is that what you would normally do?
Director Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Look, when asked where funding comes from on the HOP, we usually don't pick a particular place because it doesn't work like that. So we come back in a budget review process where there's, often quite a number of ups and downs, and at the end of that process, the funding will be allocated.
Right. Thank you very much, Director Marshall. Yes, look, I'm going to speak against the amendment. I think Councillor Pettit mentioned the Christmas Grinch. I don't wish to be a Christmas Grinch either. And I really think that it looks very much like a punishment to reduce the amount that they actually originally asked for. I think it's mean-spirited, and I'm sure that's not the spirit of this. I'm sure that council staff have to abide by rules, but councillors, we have discretion. That's why we're councillors, and we're not staff. So we can make these decisions based on our values and based on what we think is for the good of the community. So I'd speak against that amendment.
Well, I might just make a few comments that it is my understanding that the staff actually reminded the KPO that they hadn't put in an application, and still no application was lodged. It is normal that we receive one from them.
Sorry, Madam Mayor, could I interrupt?
Point of order?
Point of order. Simply that they did put in the application again. It went to the wrong place. That is my understanding. Through Madam Mayor, perhaps to Director Bevan.
I think that was still after the deadline. Director Bevan?
Madam and councillors, for clarification, the KPO was reminded that there was a deadline for the applications. That wasn't received by council by the deadline date. They did, however, put an application in after that, and this is what we're basing this on now. You are correct, it went to a different area within council, but we retrieved it.
But it was still after the sponsorships closed and after council had allocated its money based on the assumptions of the number of applications and amounts that we had received. In saying that, I'm absolutely sympathetic to Councillor Clark's views, because council sets a budget and we try to stick to it as much as we possibly can, and we'd certainly appreciate if those seeking funding from council apply in the proper process at the proper time, so that our deliberations on what we do hand out is in the context of all the applications that we've received. However, I am hoping that this is a one-off and that the KPO understands that this is not something that we can see happen regularly each year, with all the other applicants meeting the deadlines. We can't, regularly make exceptions of this nature. Everybody has to be on an equal footing. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I think we've had 2 for and 2 against for the amendment, so I think we should put it to the vote.
General Manager.
Madam Mayor and Councillors, actually we haven't, because the mover of the amendment didn't speak, so I've got Councillor Pettit in shadow as against, and Councillor Anderson, I think,
Is against.
is against as well. So we've got 3 against but no one for yet.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to speak for the amendment, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Councillor Clark.
Oh, look, I'll speak for my motion. I'm not going to repeat myself again, but I rather than people who aren't going to vote for it and speaking for it and voting against it, which is, I think, really disgusting behaviour on the floor of council, that I'm not going to keep supporting that, but I will actually say I'm speaking for this because I'm going to be supporting my amendment. So, best of luck to it. I think it's the right position, and I think that we shouldn't be making exceptions for other organisations. I think it sets a dangerous precedent if we are to start giving out money outside of the standard sponsorship program scheme. I think that if we pass this now, it says to organisations, "I'll just submit a request, and council will feel sad for you, and then we'll just give you the full amount of money." That's not government. That's not how we run business. It's not appropriate. So I'm sympathetic to the Philharmonic, but I think that they should be thankful for the money we are giving them. And so I commit the amendment to the floor. I'll do it.
Actually, Councillor Kelly, if you don't have your light on and nobody else does, then there's no more speakers and I can put the amendment anyway. And it looks like there's no further speakers. So I'll put that amendment, which is Councillor Clark's amendment. All those in favour? That is Councillor Clark. Against? Councillors Nye, Pettit, Spencer, Greenfield, Chatto, Smith, Kelly, Kay, Anderson. That amendment is lost. We revert to the original motion. Are there any speakers on the original motion now? If there's no speakers on that motion, I'll ask the mover to sum up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I genuinely do believe this is a once-off. Let this be a lesson to KPO and others to submit their applications on time. I do trust that the council staff are more than capable of identifying $10,000 from some other part of the budget, because as the Director of Corporate just said, there are always ups and downs, and we will be able to find the money from somewhere, especially if it's, from my view, especially if it's a rather small amount. I originally did have this idea of the 10,000 coming from a certain event in February, which I didn't think was necessary, but I'll leave that entirely up to the council staff to decide where that $10,000 should come from. And I don't want to get into debates about where exactly it does. They're more than capable, so thank you, everyone.
Right, I will put that motion, Councillor Nye's motion. All those in favour? That is Councillors Nye, Pettit, Spencer, Greenfield, Chatto, Smith, Kelly, Kay, Anderson. Against Councillor Clark. That is carried. We move to GB 11, New South Wales Department of Education, Joint Use Proposal, St Ives High School Indoor Sports Centre. I seek a motion. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to move the staff recommendation with a few amendments.
Thank you. Would you like to list those changes for us?
Just go back to the staff recommendation. If we can strike out A completely. Part C, if we can strike out A on Part C. And I feel that D would no longer be required, so we could strike out D of Part C as well.
Okay, and we might then
D,
allow,
move that.
if that's all, we'll just allow the staff to re-letter and
D.
number those.
So that was Part D of C in the staff recommendation. We're striking that out. Correct. Oh, C. Yeah, that's on the... Oh, sorry, that's D, sorry. Yeah, I want D struck out as well. Point D, please. Yeah. Thanks for that. Capital D. Part D.
No, part D. Oh, big D.
Actually, that reads differently in my book. Yep. Yep.
You do. That has small d.
Yeah. The other, just on there, just on the other part is in Part C, D in Part C as well. Yes, you've got that out. Thank you. Yep. Part, yeah. Correct. I think we may need a bigger screen.
Councillor Smith, we're just looking at that. If you see big C, capital C,
Yes.
that council not make a decision to enter a binding commitment for the construction of the St Ives High School project until BC, etc. wouldn't that mean that we need D, a report back, so that we do make a decision?
Okay, look, I'm happy for that.
Leave capital D in.
Leave capital D in so that the report comes back to ordinary meeting of council.
Okay, thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded Councillor Chateau. Now, councillors, if you can understand that on the screen, or in fact just look at your business papers and in front of you, and you can delete those sections in front of you if it's difficult to see on the screen. Councillor Smith, do you wish to speak to that motion now, please?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I'd like to speak to this. I think there has been a great deal of concern in relation to the reclassification of the land tied up with the St Ives progression of the St Ives basketball. I think it's important to note that we were progressing with it in any case. The recommendation in here was progressing with it, but the concerns that I'm getting from other people and councillors is in relation to the tying up the sale of these properties, which is obviously going to go a great distance to assist us in doing it. My understanding is, though, that we've actually got the financial capability this side of the financial year to do it ourselves without a T-Corp loan. That's what's been bantered around the place of putting forward, which I do not agree with. I believe that we need to put a heads of agreement in place before we can proceed any further with this item, mainly being that we need an agreement between the Department of Education and Council in the way that this is to be set up before we can progress this any further. Other than that, I think that the outcome's the same. We're going to end up with some basketball courts in St Ives, which I'm very happy about. I'm happy to answer any further questions after that.
Councillor Shadow as seconder. Do you wish to speak?
Sorry, Madam Mayor, just procedure.
Sorry, point of order.
Sorry. Could we just clarify what we've got there, please? Can't see the whole thing.
Okay, so if we go to the top, and if you look on your business papers and strike out the whole of capital A, and then go down to part C and strike out lowercase a and lowercase d. That is the only difference. Councillor Chateau, a seconder.
Yes, Madam Mayor, through you to Director Watson, I just needed to check something that it was probably the phrasing that Councillor Smith used. He said, we have the money this financial year to proceed. My understanding, that's only for the design. It's not for the whole kit and caboodle.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think what Councillor Smith is referring to there is that some of the project was funded from council reserves. So the timeline I painted was that with the design and documentation process, which is funded, council could do a budget adjustment to bring forward the internal revenue side of the equation, and that would probably be all of the money we would need this financial year. So that allows us to design, document, and in the event there is construction, we have some money set aside to pay first instalments of our share of that. By which time you're in another budget cycle, and then the rest of this motion has sorted itself out and the project is funded by loans, is what I understand Councillor Smith's getting at.
That'd be my question to Councillor Smith as well.
Director Watson answered that correctly. Thank you.
Yes, correct.
I reserve my right.
Councillor Kay, have you got your light on to speak to this item?
Not to speak to, but against.
Against, yes.
Oh, sorry, yes.
That's all right.
Sorry, I've got to use my glasses and whatever. So just in relation to we talk about projects, and I'll talk from a community perspective. So from a community perspective, we do have an expectation and we do need to provide sporting facilities. I don't want to be known as a council that can't deliver on projects. Proceeding with this project will start to address the shortage of sporting facilities in the LGA. Now, all I can see is we've got an independent review of project arrangements, including risk identification, risk allocation being undertaken and reported back to council, following consideration by council's major projects steering committee. Now, I don't have an issue with that particularly myself, but I do have an issue that we have not commenced the design and documentation for the project, instructed by council on the 26th of February 2019, and which amongst other obligations under the deed were to have completed by September 2019. So I wanted to ask the question through you, Madam Mayor, to Director Watson. Why was that milestone not adhered to? Why have we not commenced on that design?
Director Watson.
Through you, Madam Mayor. That matter was covered in the pre-briefing this afternoon. The first milestone is a heads of agreement with the Department of Education. They are not a party to the funding deed. I cannot make a party who is not a party to a funding deed enter into a heads of agreement. We have been working on a heads of agreement with them for some time. I can't make it go any faster than it is already going. They have had an up-to-date copy of our response to their heads of agreement for nearly 5 weeks, and we have not had any response. And as I said in the pre-brief, no matter what you do tonight does not mean that I will get you a funding deed and a heads of agreement in time to take advantage of the Department of Education's build.
Now, you've got...
Councillor Kay.
Oh, sorry. Continue.
That's right.
Okay, so E, we've got advice being obtained from the Office of Local Government in relation to a capital expenditure review for the project currently in preparation. Now, would I stand corrected that in our briefing earlier you said that that had actually been submitted today?
Director Watson.
That is correct, through you, Madam Mayor.
So would we be able to probably maybe delete that component?
You happy for that, Councillor Smith as mover to delete that section and Councillor Chateau as second?
No, through you, Madam Mayor.
No, not the whole thing, just...
No, just that.
Just the 3 words, apparently in preparation.
Okay. We speak about not requiring funds for a T Corp loan. I don't believe that that should be the case. We have, in many instances and in previous briefings, and noted from emails that Andrew has sent us, that this would actually be, this would probably delay the project as such, and it's likely to increase substantially the cost of construction of the project if we aren't working with the state government and doing it at the same time. So my concern was if we didn't get a loan to do this ASAP, that we'd actually miss out on the funding and this project wouldn't happen. Is there a risk factor to that, Director Watson?
Director Watson.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Obtaining money by a loan is not what I would call on a critical path. A critical path to allow us to take advantage of Department of Education's build is a heads of agreement with a third-party agency, i.e. Department of Education, and documenting a funding deed which Council is happy with. And as I alluded to in the earlier briefing with councillors, we spent an immense amount of time doing a heads of agreement with Transport for New South Wales for the Village Green, and when we came to document a funding deed, large parts of that document were reneged on, and we started again, and that process from start to finish was measured in years, not weeks.
Thank you, Councillor Kay. Councillor Smith, do you have your... Oh, sorry, who's next? Yes, Councillor Smith, Light.
Madam Mayor, through you to Director Watson, I think just to give everybody a little bit of background on this, because I've been following this very closely with what's been happening between the department, even our local member and council, Director Watson, please confirm what exactly has the Department of Education asked Council to commit to at this stage?
Director Watson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the only thing that Department of Education has asked Council to commit to is to design and documentation by the 31st of January 2020.
So we're sort of running on time there. Has the Department of Education yet confirmed that it is happy to proceed with Council's two-court under education SEP using an REF and CDC?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the short answer to that is no. We are expecting that advice on or about the 13th of December this year.
Do you have any idea how long they have been contemplating a possible expedited approval under the ESEP, which is the education SEP for people?
Director Watson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, to the best of my knowledge, Schools Infrastructure New South Wales was aware of that particular approvals pathway when Council, the General Manager and the Mayor met with the local member on the 25th of October.
So we're talking about 6 weeks. Would that be correct?
Director.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that's correct. And as I alluded to in the briefing earlier, after that meeting on the 25th of October, I went to our own solicitors and confirmed within about 24 hours that pathway was technically available.
Do you have any idea how long that will take?
Director.
Through you, Madam Mayor, as was alluded to earlier, that's close to 6 weeks, and I was able to do it in 24 hours. I can only assume that they might be having some difficulties justifying the use of that pathway.
I suppose the other thing that we need to look at, in the event that the Department of Education, for whatever reason, decides it does not wish to use the education SEP, and I note that they did not use the education SEP for their...
Sorry, Councillor Smith, we're only in questions now.
Sorry. Sorry. Just a question through you, Madam Mayor, to
Certainly.
Director Watson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, if the ESEP wasn't available, that would mean that Council would not be able to do a contiguous bill with the Department of Education. It would have to run its own DA process from start to finish, by which time the builder would be off the site.
Director Watson, in your opinion, do you believe that Council has been doing everything it possibly can do to proceed with these courts in St Ives to make this happen?
Director.
Through you, Madam Mayor, that is my firm belief. When we reported project updates to councillors at the September quarter at the October meeting, I made it clear at that point in time that Department of Education was not happy with Council's approach of running a combined build, a combined DA process or design and documentation process. But within a couple of weeks after the council meeting, they had changed their mind. Now, council staff have always tried to maintain that position over the last 2 years, and it's only in the last couple of weeks, with the intervention of the local member, that position has changed. But the pathway that he identified that our legal advice says is open is yet to be confirmed as being acceptable to the department.
Madam Mayor, through you again, to Director Watson. Has Council got other options of loans of capability of financing this project if we decide to arrange finance?
That might be one for Director Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor, yes, we do, and depending on the time frame over which we would be seeking to borrow, we might go to a place other than T-Corp. So T-Corp you would usually use for a 10 or 20-year loan. As you know, the original funding plan for this project was to fund the majority of it from asset sales. Now, while they haven't happened yet, there is still a possibility that they may happen in the future. So that could happen in a year or two's time, in which case that would provide the opportunity to repay a loan. So it would be best under those circumstances not to borrow over a 20-year period, or you probably incur break costs. Variable rate loans at the moment, indicative pricing in recent months was as low as 2.3%. A 20-year T-Corp loan at the moment is 2.35%. So whether we were to borrow from T-Corp over 20 years or a variable loan which has no fixed term, at the moment the interest rates are basically the same. So we would, depending on what evolves over the next few months, we would make that decision whichever we thought was in the best interests of council. While I'm speaking though, I might just add in regard to the loan, if this motion was adopted by council tonight, Part G is a requirement to get approval to borrow the funds. So what we would do between now and then would be apply for approval, but not actually enter into a loan. But we would have an answer as to able to confirm that the funding would be approved, subject to council resolving that way.
So basically, what you're saying is we've got a great deal of options out there available to us.
Yes, councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Nye.
Right, thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to speak against this motion, just so that we can go 2 for, 2 against. Now, my reasons for speaking against this, as a councillor, I understand that as a council we have very limited resources and finances. Just maybe half an hour ago, we were caught up in a debate over whether we had $10,000 to spare here and there, and now we're not talking about $10,000, we're talking about $13 million. Now, if I had, say, $13 million spare from a T-Corp loan or from whatever measures we have, I would start to think, how can I use this $13 million to maximise the benefit for my residents all across Ku-ring-gai? And I look at other things that we've talked about this year. So just last month, we were discussing whether or not we could potentially install synthetics at Norman Griffiths, which I would have supported and which I did support. And a big concern over that was, well, it's going to cost an extra $2 million, 1.5 to whatever, to build additional controls so that in the 1 in 50 year event of flooding, we can sort of retain all the material, that sort of thing, roughly speaking. And
Point of order, Madam Mayor.
Yes, please be
order.
seated, Councillor Nye, while I deal with the point of order. Councillor
Through
Shato.
Madam Mayor, to Director Watson. Councillor Nye has mentioned that there is an issue with Norman Griffiths, that he would have supported it. May I ask, did council staff support Norman Griffiths Oval having synthetic grass?
I think we're really getting off track here. I'd have to say
Right.
we need to be relevant to this motion. So, Councillor Nye, if you can stick to the points regarding what we have in front of us.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Then I will stick to the point of sports and basketball. Earlier in the year, we discussed another project where the incremental increase would have been an extra $4 million, and the benefit that it would have provided would be 2 additional multi-purpose courts, indoor multi-purpose courts for the residents of Ku-ring-gai, just for an extra $4 million. And that was knocked down by the majority of councillors, because at the time we argued that we did not have the $4 million to spare. Now then, when I sort of think, well, we're talking about 2 courts in one suburb and 2 courts in another suburb, we're saying we can't spend $4 million to provide 2 multi-purpose courts in one suburb, but now we're willing to spend $13 million for 2 multi-purpose courts in another suburb, where we have to do some excavation and put the parking underneath the actual basketball courts. To me, there's a sort of a weird disparity there. It's sort of like, I sort of think, if I want to use my money cost effectively, why don't I go for the low-hanging fruit? Why don't I support projects where we can spend a lot less to get something similar, which could be self-funding? Why are we knocking away the $4 million projects and entertaining the idea of $13 million? Why did we shoot down the East Linfield Community Hall, yet we're saying St. Ives basketball, which has a similar outcome, 2 courts, indoors, for substantially more money? Why are we going with that? Like, if we're saying all this stuff about, yeah, we can find the money, we can scrape the money around, we can borrow money from T-Corp, this and that, then as a council with limited funds, as a council which can consider borrowing to build sporting facilities or community facilities. I believe that other projects, such as the East Linfield Community Hall, such as the Norman Griffiths, which I'm not allowed to talk about, would make more sense before supporting the St. Ives basketball court, which I generally do support the concept of. It's just that financially, if we are knocking away two other projects which are a lot more cost effective, I can't see myself supporting this one. That's all. Thank you.
Councillor Clark, the next speaker? No, sorry, Councillor Kay.
I've got a couple of questions. So through you, Madam Mayor, to Director Watson. Do you believe, Director Watson, that we have fulfilled our milestones under clause 8.1 of the deed that are set out in order to obtain the $3.5 million grant from the New South Wales Government?
Director Watson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'm pretty sure I already answered that question. It's not in dispute that we have not put in place a heads of agreement with Department of Education by August. I would say that that is not our fault, but as I said earlier, they are not a party to that funding deed, so they are not compelled to do anything by a particular milestone date. And as I said to you earlier, we had already been in discussions with the Office of Sport about changing those milestones, as would happen with the majority, if not all, of similar sized funded projects across the state. So what we are doing is nothing unusual.
Councillor Kay.
Is this indoor sports facility likely to be cash flow positive? And if it is, what would be if we were to get a T Corp loan, what would be the difference in repayment amount of a cost to us?
Director Marshall will answer that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Under the business plan that was done by independent consultants, the project is not cash flow, is mildly cash flow positive if you're excluding the need to renew the facility, furniture and fittings, etc. over time. So if it's just on like a cash in, cash out operating basis, after a few years of establishment, the expenses were estimated at about $500,000 a year and the revenue at about 580. But subsequently, so there's an $80,000 cash surplus. Once you start having to replace basketball floors and plumbing and things over time, that would probably be eaten up. The repayment of a loan on the $11 million is about $700,000 a year. So there's not really a cash surplus, and the small one that there is would need to go to capital renewal.
So you actually say mildly cash flow positive. Could you give me some indication of some figure?
So the expenses are $500,000 and the revenues are $580. So it's an $80,000 surplus. But then out of that, whatever you needed to replace from all the assets over time, as they wear out, that would have to be funded from there. In addition, you have to repay the $700,000 per annum loan.
Councillor Clark is next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to speak for this particular motion. Look, I think we're really, what is it? We're trying to put the cart before the horse. And thank you. Yes, I've been struggling with this one for 2 years now. So, I know it's I'm too young, clearly. So, I think that what we need to be doing first is actually looking at what is the heads of agreement, what is the actual final legal agreement going to be between the usage of this facility between Council and the Department of Education. Before we can, it'd be improper for us to take up money before we actually know if we want to use this money. We could end up with a heads of agreement that's absolutely atrocious. And if that heads of agreement is completely atrocious, then we already took out the money. And then we end up with a position where we've taken all this money, we're repaying a loan, but we're they're not going to actually go forward with the project. So I think this makes sense. We're still going to investigate, potentially take out a loan. We're going to see if we actually can take out a loan from T Corp or other financial institutions. And we're still going to continue on with the project and wait till we actually see proper legal agreements that the council can actually agree to before we actually lock ourselves into any financial situation. So I think this is the smart move going forward for council. My desire would have been for it to include all of the parts for the rezoning, but that's all right. If this is what council desires, I think that this is a reasonable middle ground going forward to see this project still continue without just wildly locking us into weird financial positions. I believe as Director Marshall was saying, we're looking at repayments of $700,000 per year. This is not an insignificant amount of money we would be potentially talking about. I know a number of people have tried to say that this project is going to be cash flow positive. I've yet to see a single piece of evidence saying that this will be cash flow positive. If it's going to potentially maybe a gross revenue of $80,000 per year, but then if you include all the actual resurfacing of courts and the loan repayments, it's not cash flow positive. If it was a cash flow positive thing, something is going to make a lot of money, you know what would happen? Someone would privately open up a bunch of basketball courts in St. Ives if they're going to make hundreds of thousands of dollars per year, as some people have implied. There's a reason no one's doing that. We don't do these projects to make money, and so of course, so it's not a big issue, but the implication that we are is just silly, and I don't understand where those numbers are coming from, and the numbers just simply do not stack up on that behalf. So I think that this makes a lot of sense going forward. And I'm looking forward to seeing a heads of agreement from the department that council can agree to. And I hope they do come to the table, because I think that this is a great project for Ku-ring-gai. But it's only going to be a great project for us if we actually get use out of it. There's no point building a set of courts that then is exclusively used by the school. There's no, if we only get some weird little time allocation. There needs to be a proper heads of agreement that we all can agree on. And as I've yet to see that, I would be very hesitant as locking us into any funding model at this stage. So I think that this is a reasonable middle ground going forward. And look forward to seeing the vote.
Councillor Nye.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've got a question to the relevant officer or officers. I'm just wondering if we're willing to potentially explore borrowing money from T Corp for projects which may or may not be cash flow positive, and that would benefit sport and Ku-ring-gai, whether or not, in this low interest rate environment, whether or not we would be willing to start exploring a similar approach for other sporting facilities across Ku-ring-gai, especially if a business case can be built.
Director Marshall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. As we covered in the report, the funding strategy the council adopted for the $120 million worth of asset funded projects was an attempt to make these expansionary projects sustainable for council. As you know, the state government set us priorities for Fit for the Future a few years ago, whereby we need to look after our existing assets before we build new ones. And we're not in a position that we can say that we do that. So as a balance, in order to find a way to fund new projects for the community, we agreed on a strategy whereby we would only fund those projects by recycling existing assets that were underutilised, which is where the asset sales idea came from. So this project, along with a number of others, including renewal of existing assets, which is $32 million, existing commitments to Section 94 funded projects of $16 million. So in terms of financial sustainability, they're the ones that should be funded first. So we identified in this report that if we were to decide to go down a path where we were funding things not from asset sales, that we would need to have a good think about reprioritising the projects that are left, because we can't fund all of the projects, $120 million worth of them, out of loans. We've also made recent decisions that probably will have an effect on that in relation to major hub developments. Yes, it is always possible to review capital works programs and loans, but at the end of the day, we have to repay those loans. So this project alone is $700,000 in repayments if we were to borrow, which have to come from somewhere, obviously. So if we were to borrow more for more projects, we would have to find ways to repay that as well. So part of the recommendation was that that a decision not be made about this project or any others until they're looked at holistically. And if it's the case that asset sales are not going to eventuate, then we need to reprioritise which ones should be done or not done and how should they be funded.
Councillor Shatto. Sorry, Councillor Kay next. Sorry, I don't have that screen in front of me. Thank you, Councillor Kay.
That's all right. I just wanted to, this is through you to Director Watson. We received an email, I believe yesterday, talking about that it would be cash flow positive. Can you just confirm that that was the email, or I had maybe misinterpreted the email that was sent to us?
Well, yes, I think you may have misinterpreted from the information that's been given to us about 2 times now tonight. Director Watson?
No, this was via an email.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I was responding to issues that were raised in some questions, and I said it was cash flow positive on a cash-on-cash basis, and Director Marshall has qualified that. But I certainly said in the email back to you yesterday that there was not funds to pay for a loan, and that has been, again, reiterated today to the tune of $800,000. So my answer yesterday was valid as it is now.
Thank you for the clarity. Now, would you also be able to confirm that this would be the only indoor sporting facility in our LGA?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think councillors are aware of that. There's nothing new in that.
No, that's right. Councillor Kay, more questions? No. Councillor Shatto.
Madam Mayor, yes, I supported this with some reservations, but felt it was important that we move forward on this and not backwards. So this recommendation is not an instruction to pull out of the project, as has been suggested, and it's not. It doesn't negate any of our obligations. So I just wanted to say that right up front. I personally would have preferred to see it contingent on asset sales, but I think what we've got here is a way in which we can still review the heads of agreement, and when it comes, and look at the legal agreements and the risk identification, and look at the numbers for borrowing money and see if that is really, I think as Director Marshall intimated, if that is really the way we want to go. I personally would rather see asset sales first, but it appears that that's not going to happen.
And we can just stick to questions at this stage because you have spoken.
No, I haven't spoken.
Sorry?
I haven't spoken. So, I don't have anything against basketball. In fact, I have a grandson who plays basketball. He's a very tall chap who plays basketball. However, I do know that we have other funding obligations, very dear to my heart, the Marion Street Theatre. And I would hate to think that this was an either-or decision in the end, because I think we need both sporting facilities and arts facilities in Ku-ring-gai. However, Councillor Smith has my support on this.
And sorry, Councillor Shatto, because I do recall now that you reserved your right as seconder, so thank you for speaking on that motion now. Are there any other speakers on this item? If not, I'll ask the mover, Councillor Smith, to sum up, please.
Madam Mayor, I put this motion forward. I think it's a very positive step for Ku-ring-gai, and especially as a councillor at St Ives, I'm very proud to put this forward. I also would like to take the opportunity to thank the staff in assisting in preparing the documentation that they've done in trying to move forward with this type of negotiation, as because it is quite tricky when you're dealing with quite a number of departments. And I put this to the floor.
Thank you. I will put that motion, Councillor Smith's motion. All those in favour? That is Councillors Clark, Greenfield, Chatto, Smith, Anderson. Against, Councillors Nye, Pettit, Spencer, Kelly, Kay. That means an equal vote on this matter, and I will use my casting vote in favour of the motion. That is carried.
That's it.
Councillors, General Manager, extra reports
There are none,
circulated
Madam
to the meeting. There are none. Councillors, business without notice, subject to clause 9.3 of the Code of Meeting Practice. Councillor Greenfield.
Madam Mayor, as it's the last meeting tonight for the year, I'd like to say on behalf of the councillors, I would like to take the opportunity to thank the directors and council staff for all their support throughout 2019 and wish each and every one a happy and healthy Christmas and a prosperous new year.
Thank you very much, Councillor Greenfield. I'm not quite sure that fits in with clause 9.3, but we will allow that tonight in that context. Councillors, are there any questions? Sorry, with notice. No questions with notice. Director inspections, there are none. So there being no further business, I declare the meeting closed at 8:19 p.m. and wish all councillors and members of the public a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.